welcome everyone. I think we are at chapter 20. Does that sound right? So this section may sound familiar to you, and it's not because we've done it before, but it's because Abraham has done it before. And this is, I just want to say, we can laugh at this, and there's, the modern scholars will say that the reason you have this repetition is maybe because you've got the same story as this is an oral tradition originally. I mean, the stories of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and the patriarchs, they were oral stories before they were written stories. And so you get, when you have an oral tradition, you have the same stories being told in different parts of the country and so forth, and some of the stories get modified. So one explanation is that we just have two versions of the same story. One was with Pharaoh in Egypt, and the other was with Abimelech. Some of you, those of you who know the story, you'll see. But I don't know. That might be true, but I think the more useful story, the more edifying story to our souls, is just that it is a fundamental truth of human nature that we tend to live in patterns, and we tend to make the same mistakes over and over again. Some of you, I knew girls, this is sexist maybe, but I knew girls in my 20s who kept dating the same kind of guy. And it kept not working out. but it was, a pattern of dating and a pattern of bad choices. And men do it too with women. I know men who've been married 5 times, and they just keep repeating the pattern of mistakes. And we do this, and I don't know, everybody. I keep making the same mistakes over and over again, in the way I manage my feelings in my relationship with my wife. We've had the same. I don't know. Everybody who's been married, you've probably had. There's an argument that every married couple has had 20 or 30 times, right? Because you just as whoever's fault it is. Right. We repeat the same. A married couple will repeat the same argument, have the same conflict, because they repeat the same pattern. This is just to say that we as human beings fall into patterns, and sin is often a pattern. That we keep repeating it, and there's a graphic way that I think Proverbs puts it this way. I'm not sure if this is right, but this is in the Bible anyway, in the Old Testament. As a dog returns to its vomit, so does a man return to his sin. That's a very graphic image, but anyone who's had a dog, when dogs can sometimes go consume their own vomit, but humans do this too when we backslide, when we return to an old sin, right? We just, an alcoholic, for example, quits drinking but has a relapse. This and it's sin is bad. Sin is like vomit. It's not good, but something in us makes us keep going back to it. So yeah, Abraham's going to repeat himself here. Chapter 20. Now Abraham moved on from there into the region of the Negev and lived between Kadesh and Shur. For a while he stayed in Gerar, and there Abraham said of his wife Sarah, "She is my sister." Right, remember this. Then Abimelech, king of Gerar, sent for Sarah and took her. But God came to Abimelech in a dream one night and said to him, "You are as good as dead because of the woman you have taken. She is a married woman." God, again, is protecting the sanctity of marriage. Now Abimelech, well, not only that, but also the promise, right? Again, this is about marriage, and Abimelech has taken a married woman, and so that's dangerous because that makes God angry, adultery. But it's not just adultery, because this puts in jeopardy the promise, right? because Abraham needs Sarah to fulfill the promise. If Abraham and Sarah are not together, and if Sarah belongs to some other man, then the promise will be forfeit. So God's promise depends on this also. Now Abimelech had not gone near her, so he said, Lord, will you destroy an innocent nation? Did he not say to me, she is my sister, and didn't she also say, he is my brother? I have done this with a clear conscience and clean hands. Abimelech says, Pharaoh doesn't say this, but we think it, right? This isn't fair. It wasn't when Abraham did this and Pharaoh took Sarah. We thought, well, it's not Pharaoh's fault. He doesn't know. Abraham's the one that lied. But yet God is threatening with punishment, not Abraham, but Abimelech. And Abimelech saying, look, this is God. This wasn't my fault. I didn't know. Then God said to him in the dream, yes, I know you did this with a clear conscience, and so I have kept you from sinning against me. That is why I did not let you touch her. Now return the man's wife, for he is a prophet, and he will pray for you, and you will live. But if you do not return her, you may be sure that you and all yours will die. I think this is the first time we have Abraham called a prophet. And that is because Abraham is God's representative, right? Abraham represents God in the world, so he's a prophet. And he also has this power. We call this the power of intercession, right? If Abraham prays for Abimelech, that will be effective. This is where Christians get the idea that we can pray for each other. That if I'm in a spot and I need help, I might ask Linda to pray for me, right? Because her prayer might be effective for me. And so we do this today. What have we read where this happens? Job, right? How many of you were here back when we did? That's what we started. We read Job, and you remember at the end of Job where God is angry with Job's friends because God says they were not right and they didn't speak of me truly, and God said, so I'm going to kill them. And Job, being a wonderful man, he prays and asks God to spare his friend's life. And if you remember Job, they said some pretty awful things to Job, that your suffering is your fault, and even that his children must have sinned and deserve to die. They said cruel things, but Job intercedes for his friends, and so God doesn't kill them. That's intercession. We pray for each other. Now return the man's, but if you do not return her, you may be sure that you and all yours will die. So now he knows that she belongs to another, he'll be guilty if he doesn't return her. Early the next morning, Abimelech summoned all his officials, and when he told them all that had happened, they were very much afraid. Then Abimelech called Abraham in and said, what have you done to us? How have I wronged you that you have brought such great guilt upon me and my kingdom? You've done things to me that should not be done. And Abimelech asked Abraham, what was your reason for doing this? So Abimelech's angry at Abraham because Abraham's choices has put him and his whole kingdom in jeopardy. Abraham replied, I said to myself, there is surely no fear of God in this place, and they will kill me because of my wife. Besides, she really is my sister, the daughter of my father, though not of my mother, and she became my wife. And when God, so it was half true, right? This is the last refuge of every liar, right? Abraham's kind of a scoundrel here. Well, technically, he says, it wasn't totally a lie, right? But it was still a lie, and we know that. God knows it. And when God had me wander from my father's household, I said to her, this is how you can show your love to me. Everywhere we go, say of me, he is my brother. So again, Abraham, not particularly admirable here, because his motivation is self-preservation, right? Abraham says, lie so that I can save my skin. And it's just, the Torah, the Bible does not give us perfect people, right? It doesn't give us perfect families. It doesn't give us perfect husbands. And I said on Sunday that there are no ideal families in the Bible. I was talking to someone who said, he said he thought about it for a second. He realized, what about Jesus' family? What about Mary and Joseph and Jesus? Weren't they an ideal, good family? Well, I don't know if you remember that time when Jesus' mother and his brothers came and thought that Jesus was crazy and they were going to come put him away. In other words, they were going to come chain him up in the basement like a crazy person. So no, there are no ideal families in the Bible. Not even Jesus' family was picture perfect. Okay, so not a perfect marriage here and not a perfect husband, which is comforting for us husbands, right? No? Well, I guess you can just say, well, look, at least you weren't married to Abraham. I'm doing better than him. I don't know how much weight that will carry with the wives.
I don't think you need to worry.
There is room for some concern here.
All right, verse 14. Then Abimelech brought sheep and cattle and male and female slaves and gave them to Abraham, and he returned Sarah, his wife, to him. And Abimelech said, my land is before you, live wherever you like. So this actually, Abraham, in a sense, gets rewarded for this lie, right? He ends up with his wife and with more possessions, and he ends up wealthier than he started. And this is also connected to the promise. Because why is that? Do you see the connection between what happens here and the promise? Remember the part of the promise where God says, those who bless you, I will bless. Those who curse you, I will curse. Right? So, those who are kind to Abraham will be rewarded, and those who are unkind to Abraham will be smited, will be under threat. And that's what we see happening here, is that the way Abimelech is afraid because God is on the side of Abraham. And that's part of the promise that God has made to him, is that whoever curses you, I'll curse, and whoever blesses you, I will bless. So, all right. Verse 16, to Sarah he said, I am giving your brother 1,000 shekels of silver, so more wealth. 1,000 shekels of silver, that's a lot of money in the ancient world. This is to cover the offense against you before all who are with you. You are completely vindicated. Then Abraham prayed to God, and God healed Abimelech, his wife, and his slave girls, so they could have children again. For the Lord had closed up every womb in Abimelech's household because of Abraham's wife Sarah. So we didn't hear what the punishment was. But this is, again, curse I will curse, bless I will bless. While Abimelech had Sarah, the punishment was that every woman, not just every wife, but every woman, every womb in Abimelech's household was closed up, was barren. And so God wants, and it's not until Abimelech returns Sarah along with the animals and the silver that the curse relents. Any questions or comments there? This is very similar to what happens with Abraham and Pharaoh. And Pharaoh sends Abraham off with some goodies too. All right, chapter 21. This we leave behind that story, and now we have the birth of Isaac. I want to the patriarchs. That's where we are. We're in the stories of the patriarchs. Abraham is the first, and we're about finished with Abraham, and now we're going to pick up Isaac. And Isaac is, I don't know how well you know Genesis or the stories, but Isaac is, I don't know how to put this. He's the least exciting and the least impressive of all the patriarchs. I don't know. But in fairness to him, when someone has a famous father or mother, right, they always live in their shadow. So if your father was a great artist, a genius, or a wealthy person, or whatever, as the son of someone like that, it's very hard. You're never going to live up to them. Or oftentimes when your child is a great person, you're just known as the father of somebody. My dad joked about that, In my last church, I grew up in my last church, and my parents knew everybody there. And when I started as the pastor there, instead of being my parents joked, my dad joked, instead of being Aaron's dad, he's now everyone. Oh, you're Aaron's parents, rather than me being David and Pam's son. No, but anyway, Isaac is in the shadow of both his father and his son, right? Because Isaac's son is Jacob, and Jacob has several chapters devoted to his adventures, and we'll get to those. Jacob's the father of the 12 tribes of Israel. And of course, Isaac's father is Abraham, who is, in many ways the greatest of all the patriarchs. So Isaac's this.
But he was the nice one, though, I think. I mean, he had just one wife. Right?
Yeah, he
really loved each other.
Yeah. I mean, Isaac is nice. That's true. He is a nice guy. The Jimmy Carter of patriarchs. I say that I like Jimmy Carter. He's probably my favorite. I mean, I think he was a good, regardless of I think he is and was a very good man. But even as someone who likes him, the criticism of him and his presidency was that Jimmy Carter was a nice president, but he wasn't quite as effective as he could have been. Maybe in part because he was nice. But that's right. I think that's fair. Isaac is very nice. But yeah, okay. So anyway, we're in Isaac's story now. Now the Lord was gracious to Sarah as he had said, and the Lord did for Sarah what he had promised. Sarah became pregnant and bore a son to Abraham in his old. It's been, what has it been? We first had the promise in chapter 12, and now it's chapter 21, and finally it's come true, right? So Genesis is really milking the drama here. When is she going to get pregnant? When is she? And finally she does, and she gives birth to Isaac. I don't remember if he gave a time frame for when it would happen. Maybe. I'm not. Yeah, you could be right. I'm not remembering that, but it very well could be there. Just as far as the text goes, though, it feels like we've waited quite a while, but it's finally fulfilled, and that's intentional because of what's about to come next. We have been like a good movie producer or director. The director has made us wait and wait and wait. Finally, this happens, and so Abraham gave the name Isaac to the son Sarah bore him. When his son Isaac was 8 days old, Abraham circumcised him as God commanded him. So we have circumcision. Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him. So this is not a spring chicken. Sarah said, God has brought me laughter. Remember, I said that Isaac's name is Laughter, and remember that both Abraham and Sarah laugh at the promise because it's preposterous to them. So God has brought me laughter, and everyone who hears about this will laugh with me. So, but that in this line kind of the laughter that was derisive, the laughter that was almost bordered on irreverence, is now the laughter of pure joy, and laughter that will be passed from generation to generation. Of course, as Christians, you can read a lot into this. That, for example, when we celebrate Advent, which we're about to do, and we talk about hope and joy, it's the hope and joy that we have in the birth of Christ all begins with this laughter at the birth of Isaac. Because it's through Isaac that we have Jesus Christ. It's through Isaac that we have a Messiah. So I just want to draw out the connections here for you, that this laughter is when she says, and everyone who hears about this will laugh with me, that includes us. And she added, who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children? Yet I have borne him a son in his old age. The child grew and was weaned, and on the day Isaac was weaned, Abraham held a great feast. But Sarah saw that the son whom Hagar the Egyptian had borne to Abraham was mocking, and she said to Abraham, "Get rid of that slave woman and her son, for that slave woman's son will never share in the inheritance with my son Isaac." So there's now jealousy. The matter distressed Abraham greatly because it concerned his son, so that because Ishmael is Abraham's son. But God said to him, "Do not be so distressed about the boy and your maidservant. Listen to whatever Sarah tells you, because it is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned. I will make the son of the maidservant into a nation also, because he is your offspring." So that's God's consolation to Abraham. And God says, go ahead and do what your wife says, which is always good advice. Go along with Sarah, send her away, but don't worry, because I'll take care of him, and I will make him a great nation too. Although the inheritance, being what I talked about on Sunday, the unique relationship with God is the inheritance that is going to go to Isaac alone. Verse 14, early the next morning Abraham took some food and a skin of water and gave them to Hagar. It's not much. He set them on her shoulders and then sent her off with the boy. She went on her way and wandered in the desert of Beersheba. It doesn't that's not much to give him with. Just so it's they're in a hard spot. When the water in the skin was gone, she put the boy under one of the bushes. Then she went off and sat down nearby, about a bow shot away, for she thought, "I cannot watch the boy die." And as she sat there nearby, she began to sob. So Abraham sent him off, and it wasn't enough even to get him to safety. And so Hagar thinks that they're going to die in the desert for lack of water. So this is a very sad picture. She leaves the boy under the bush, and then she goes far enough away that she can't hear the boy cry, because she doesn't want to have to watch the child die. God heard the boy crying. And remember, that's what God does. God hears the cries of the weak and the oppressed. God, just as with the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, God heard the cry went up against Sodom, the cries of those who had been hurt and oppressed. And God hears that. So in the same way, God hears the cries of this abandoned child. Then the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, "What is the matter, Hagar? Do not be afraid. God has heard the boy crying as he lies there. Lift the boy up and take him by the hand, for I will make him into a great nation." Then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water. So she went and filled the skin with water and gave the boy a drink. God was with the boy as he grew up. He lived in the desert and became an archer. While he was living in the desert of Paran, his mother got a wife for him from Egypt. So it's God's compassion here is really strong, and it's quite moving. But what I find so beautiful is that God here, we're being told that God hears the cries of children. He hears the cries of those who are abandoned. I said the same stuff before, but I think it's very important we understand that God, in the Bible, God is on the side of the least, the last, and the losers. Whereas, and that's very in strong contrast to the way most ancient religions thought about their gods. And it's counterintuitive. God is on the side of the powerful. That's why they're powerful, right? Why else would you be rich and powerful and great? It's because God must be on your side. That was the assumption of everybody. And it's logical. But here God is on the side of the weak and the poor and the abandoned and the marginalized. So that's just highlight Judaism, and the Bible is very unique. It's not like the gods of other religions, especially of pagan religions. All right, verse 22. At that time, Abimelech and Phicol, the commander of his forces, said to Abraham, "God is with you in everything you do. Now swear to me here before God that you will not deal falsely with me or my children or my descendants. Show to me and the country where you are living as an alien the same kindness I have shown to you." That's you're gonna that if we were you will hear that again in the Bible as you keep reading, but the country where you are living as an alien. So Abraham is still at this point an alien, uh, uh, an immigrant in the land he is living. And when if we were to read the law, the Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers, several times, maybe 10 or 20 times, it repeats this quite often. It says, you will be kind to the alien who lives in your land because you were aliens in a foreign land. And that applies both to Abraham and, of course, to the Hebrew people in Egypt who were aliens in Egypt. So that phrase, this phrase that we just read, is important, and it's repeated multiple times in the rest of the Bible. All right. Abraham said, I swear it. Then Abraham complained to Abimelech about a well of water that Abimelech's servants had seized. But Abimelech said, I don't know who has done this. You did not tell me, and I heard about it only today. So Abraham brought sheep and cattle and gave them to Abimelech, and the two men made a treaty. Abraham set apart 7 ewe lambs from the flock, and Abimelech asked Abraham, what is the meaning of these 7 ewe lambs you have set apart by themselves? He replied, accept these 7 lambs from my hand as a witness that I dug this well. So that place was called Beersheba, because the 2 men swore an oath there. After the treaty had been made at Beersheba, Abimelech and Phicol, the commander of his forces, returned to the land of the Philistines. Abraham planted a tamarisk tree in Beersheba, and there he called upon the name of the Lord, the eternal God, and Abraham stayed in the land of the Philistines for a long time. Okay, so that's a backstory about the relationship between Israel and the Philistines, which was the Philistines were kind of the arch rivals of the Israelites later on when they lived as a nation. And so we're hearing the backstory of their relationship. Any questions, comments there? Okay, chapter 22. This chapter, or this section is 19 verses long, but it is probably the most written about section of Genesis in terms of what people, its importance in the history of Christian and Jewish theology is unmatched. Soren Kierkegaard, have you heard of him? Do you know who Kierkegaard was? He was a Christian existentialist philosopher. He wrote an entire book about these 18 verses called Fear and Trembling. And I don't think there's any part of the Bible that's had more commentary written about it. And no section as small as this that's had more written about it. And because this is the story of the sacrifice of Isaac, or in Hebrew, the Akedah, what we call Akedah means binding. And because Isaac isn't sacrificed, he's bound, and that's what this story is called, the Akedah. All right, sometime later, God tested Abraham. He said to him, Abraham, here I am, he replied. Then God said, take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains I will tell you about. This is the first time we have heard the word love in the Bible. And it's not, the first time someone loves another human being in the whole Bible is this right here. It's not husband and wife. It's not Abraham and Sarah. It's Abraham and Isaac. So the first mention of love in the Bible is right here, between Abraham and his son Isaac. And so God says, take him, Isaac, whom you love, and go to the region of Moriah, sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains I will tell you about. Which is, again, what I said, we've been made to wait from chapter 12 to chapter 21 for the birth of Isaac. And now, after we've waited this whole time and had all these close calls and overcome all these obstacles, we've been through so much to get to this child. And now God says, I want you to sacrifice him. Early the next morning, Abraham got up and saddled his donkey. he took with him 2 of his servants and his son Isaac. When he had cut enough wood for the burnt offering, he set out for the place God had told him about. On the 3rd day, Abraham looked up and saw the place in the distance. He said to his servants, "Stay here with the donkey while I and the boy go over there. We will worship, and then we will come back to you." Abraham took the wood for the burnt offering and placed it on his son Isaac, and he himself carried the fire and the knife, so probably a torch. As the 2 of them went on together, Isaac spoke up and said to his father Abraham, "Father." "Yes, my son," Abraham replied, "the fire and wood are here." Isaac said, "But where is the lamb for the burnt offering?" Abraham answered, "God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, my son." And the 2 of them went on together. When they reached the place God had told him about, Abraham built an altar there and arranged the wood on it. He bound his son Isaac and laid him on the altar, on top of the wood. Then he reached out his hand and took the knife to slay his son. But the angel of the Lord called out to him from heaven, "Abraham, Abraham." "Here I am," he replied. "Do not lay a hand on the boy." He said, "Do not do anything to him. Now I know that you fear God, because you have not withheld from me your son, your only son." Abraham looked up, and there in a thicket he saw a ram caught by its horns. He went over and took the ram and sacrificed it as a burnt offering instead of his son. So Abraham called that place, "The Lord will provide." And to this day it is said, "On the mountain of the Lord it will be provided." The angel of the Lord called to Abraham from heaven a second time and said, "I swear by myself, declares the Lord, that because you have done this and have not withheld your son, your only son, I will surely bless you and make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and as the sand on the seashore. Your descendants will take possession of the cities of their enemies, and through your offspring all nations on earth will be blessed, because you have obeyed me." Then Abraham returned to his servants, and they set off together for Beersheba, and Abraham stayed in Beersheba. So that's the Akedah, the most written about 18 verses in the Bible. And there are, because it's the most written about, there are as many interpretations as you can imagine. Some interpreters have said that this is really about God making the point that he doesn't want child sacrifice, because we know, right, that child sacrifice was a part of other pagan religions of the time. And so when God rejects this sacrifice, he's saying, I'm not like these other gods that want you to sacrifice your children. Kierkegaard wrote a whole book about this, and he said it's about what he called the teleological suspension of the ethical, which is a fancy way of saying that there is a time in the life of every person where there is something more important than morality, where you set aside what's right and wrong and you just act in faith. Others have said that this story teaches the opposite, that there is no suspension of the ethical, that the point of this story is for us to be horrified and to say there's no act of faith that trumps morality. So yeah, it's it's a difficult story for us to read. I'll tell you 2 little teachings about the story. One is from a rabbi. You notice here in the story when God, so the message to Abraham, sacrifice your son Isaac, comes directly from God, right? But when Abraham is stopped from sacrificing Isaac, it's an angel. And one of the rabbis, I can't remember who it was, says that this is because no angel would take the job. When if God's you go tell this man to sacrifice his son, all the angels said, if you want that done, God, you better do it yourself. And there's a story about that. A rabbi, there was a rabbi in a synagogue, like a church, and the church board, like our session, they wanted to fire the caretaker. They wanted to fire David Barrett, their David Barrett, and the rabbi said, I won't do it. You have to do it yourself. And he cited this. He says, if you wanna take someone's job away, you do it. Don't send me. Do it yourself. And so anyway, I think I'm not going to give you a neat, tidy interpretation of this passage because that would be, I think, absurd and ridiculous. There is no easy interpretation that makes this passage, you're not nothing I can say is going to make you go home and feel good about what happened here. In that vein, one of the other things that's said is, the rabbis are debating or talking about this, and they're saying, what was the most difficult challenge? Why was this so challenging? What was the hardest part of this for Abraham? Was it to put the wood on his son? Was it this conversation where he has to kind of not lie but evade? Isaac says, "Dad, where's the sacrifice?" And Abraham just says, "God's going to provide." And the rabbis said, no, the most difficult part of this story is the walk home. Right? Because now Abraham and Isaac now knows that his father was ready to kill him. And they have to walk home together and get back to their life after this has happened. And could you imagine how this would have affected their relationship as father and son? I don't know. Another thing. But we sacrifice our children, in a sense. If you send your son or daughter into the army, you're saying it's worth. You recognize that your child could die in a war, and that there are things that are worth more than your child's life. If your child dies for their country in war. You're saying most people, I don't know. Yeah, the people who do this, they're okay with it. They recognize, if my son joins the military and dies protecting his country, he died for something greater than himself. And so there is an ideal, there is a purpose that is worth the loss of our children. And so for Abraham, the test is, is faith, is there something that is even more valuable to Abraham than the life of his child? And that's the test. Is God more important than your child? And but it's interesting because when I talk about this, most of us are somewhat okay with, and maybe it's because because they're adults, obviously, but that we would send our children off to die in war and say, when our children die in war, they're dying for their country, and it's not good. We don't like it, but we recognize that what they're dying for is valuable, is worth those lives.
Our children, like you said, they're adults. They make their own decision about,
Sure, that's a difference.
None of the recruiters who called our house got to talk to my son. And the Navy recruiter really got in here full.
Yeah. Well, not everyone is comfortable with that,
I was not comfortable with that. I was not comfortable with, because my sons, when they were in high school, I got recruiters calling from all branches of the service. And I was handling it with my oldest son, because he was like a senior in high school when this started. But the same year, he's still getting the calls, and then they start calling from my younger son, who's 2 years younger, and is only 16 years old. And I went through the room, and a friend advised me to get hold of my congressman, and I did, and the call stopped for a year.
Yeah.
Because I told him that's totally ridiculous. He's sophomore in high school, 16 years old. Why are you recruiting boys at 16?
Yeah. And that is one way to read this text again, and many have, that the lesson that we're supposed to take from this text is that there is nothing worth the sacrifice of our children, of their lives, But it is worth what would we die for? What would we allow our children to die for? Is there a cause or a belief that is so valuable that we would either be willing to die for it, or we would be okay if our children chose to die for it. And again, it's very different that Isaac doesn't exactly choose. But that's a modern sensibility anyway. The whole idea of choice being so important. Because really, this is about Abraham. It's not about Isaac. This is a test of Abraham's faith. And that's what the text is focused on.
Was it showing his faith being that strong clear back when he told the servants that we'll be back? I mean, it says, keep the donkey here, and the boy and I will go there and worship, and then we'll come back to you. So
Right.
he must have known or felt that God was going to provide some other way.
Yes. Yes. And that is what one of the points Kierkegaard makes, is that faith can be very complicated, because on the one hand, Abraham has to be willing to pick up the knife and do it. He has to be willing to lose his son. But at the same time, he has to trust that God will return back to him what he sacrifices somehow, or that what he's sacrificing won't truly be lost. Yeah, so I'm glad you pointed that out. Part of what shows Abraham's faith is that somehow he believes beyond reason that they're going to come back. And what does it mean that he trusts that, but yet is still willing to pick up the knife? And the angel has to stop him. He's going to do it.
It's a good thing the angel got there and talked.
Right. But this is one of whether Kierkegaard is right or not about the point of the story. It's nevertheless one of the more important lesson I think that Kierkegaard brings out of this text is that faith is very hard. I think we get caught up in thinking that faith is easy. That faith is just a simple choice, and I don't know. You go see Billy Graham and you pray the sinner's prayer and you choose to become a Christian, choose to believe in Jesus. Okay, well, no, that's actually way too easy. Real faith is not that easy. Real faith requires sacrifice. And in a way, you don't know if you really believe until you're asked to sacrifice for what you believe. And so this story, if it says nothing else, it says that faith is much harder than we often make it out to be. And it's also, I'll say one last thing, it's also true there is no love without sacrifice. You can't really be said to love anything until you know that you're either willing to or that you will sacrifice for it. You can say you love your wife, but in the course of a marriage, you will be asked to sacrifice your own happiness, your own comfort, your own convenience for your spouse. And if you are not willing to make a sacrifice for that love, it's not real love. And so sacrifice is just, the point is to say here that in any relationship, sacrifice is at the core of it. And our relationship with God is no different. Sacrifice is part of our relationship with God. So yeah, I don't want you to be. My goal is not to give you an explanation of this story that makes you comfortable with it. The point, I think, of the story is to make you uncomfortable. So. All right, any other comments, questions on the Akedah? We see, I lied, I'll point out one other thing. That Christians will read this passage and where you will see Jesus here, right? Where is Jesus in this passage? What?
Isaac
Do you see Jesus in Isaac? Maybe. That's not what I thought. But I would say in the ram.
Oh, okay.
Jesus is the sacrifice that God provides. All right. Verse, where are we at here? We got 10 minutes. We can do, yeah, we might better just finish the chapter. Verse 20, sometime later Abraham was told, Milcah is also a mother. She has borne sons to your brother Nahor. Uz, the firstborn, Booz, Uz and Booz, his brother, Kemuel, the father of Aram, Kesed, Hazo, Pildash, Jidlaph, and Bethuel. Bethuel became the father of Rebekah. Milcah bore these 8 sons to Abraham's brother Nahor, his concubine, whose name was Rumah, also had sons, Tebah, Gaham, Tahash, and Makkah. So this will be important later because this is where Isaac will get a wife. So through this family, because again, the concern that Lot's daughters have of not wanting to marry outside of the tribe is expressed here. We don't want to see Isaac take a wife from the Philistines or from the Egyptians or some idol worshiping. We want to if the part of what secures the promise is that the descendants of Abraham remain pure and uncorrupt. And so that's always been part of Judaism, which not marrying. Don't marry a goy, right? You know what a goy is? A goy is a Gentile. It's a sort of a Jews use the term to mean Gentiles, somebody who's not Jewish. And a Jewish mother doesn't want their son to marry a goy, meaning a Catholic or a Protestant or a Christian or whatever. It doesn't matter, a non-Jew, because you want to pass down the faith, pure and uncorrupted, and you marry. My dad married a goy, and look what happened. Right? His son became a Presbyterian, and that's. But that's the concern here is we want Isaac to get a wife who is going to keep this relationship with God in the family and keep the faith of Abraham pure, and not corrupt it with idolatry. So, okay, I think that any questions, comments here? Okay, so we'll get a wife for Isaac next week. All right, thanks everybody.